On a crisp autumn morning in Newport, Rhode Island, I stood at the edge of our wraparound porch, watching Gregory pack the last of his belongings into his gleaming Mercedes. 40 years of marriage reduced to 3 suitcases and a cardboard box of vinyl records. "You'll regret this, Eleanor," he called up to me, his voice carrying on the salt-tinged breeze. "Nobody starts over at 68. I said nothing, just sipped my coffee and watched him struggle with the trunk. The diamond on my finger caught the morning light, sending tiny rainbows dancing across the white railing. It was the same 4-carat ring he'd given me on our wedding day, back when he was still a junior investment banker with big dreams, and I was just the quiet daughter of his boss, with secrets I'd never shared. Gregory slammed the trunk shut, then looked up at me one last time. His expression wavered between anger and uncertainty. "What will you even do without me?" he asked, almost genuinely curious. "You've never had to worry about money a day in your life." I smiled then, for the first time that morning. "I suppose I'll find out," I replied, my voice steadier than it had been in years. As his car disappeared down our tree-lined driveway, I pulled my phone from my pocket and made a call I'd been rehearsing for over 2 decades. "Mr. Harrington? It's Eleanor." "Yes, Eleanor Mitchell. I'd like to access account number 85479032. I paused, watching a sailboat tack across the bay. "Yes, all of it. It's time. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." When I met Gregory Mitchell in the summer of 1983, everyone said we were perfect for each other. He was the rising star at my father's investment firm, ambitious, charismatic, and blessed with the kind of confidence that made people lean in when he spoke. I was 28, had graduated from Wellesley with honors, and was working as a financial analyst at a competing firm, much to my father's dismay. "A lady doesn't need to work, Eleanor," he'd say during our Sunday dinners. "Especially not when she has prospects like Gregory Mitchell." The truth was, I enjoyed my job. I had a natural talent for numbers, for seeing patterns where others saw chaos. I could predict market shifts weeks before they happened. My colleagues called it intuition, but it was more than that. It was a deep understanding of systems, financial ones, yes, but also human ones. The way people behaved when money was involved fascinated me. Gregory and I were married within 8 months of meeting. The wedding was lavish, held at my parents' estate in Connecticut. 500 guests, a 12-piece orchestra, and a dress. That cost more than most people's cars. My father beamed with pride as he walked me down the aisle. "You've made a good choice," he whispered. "Mitchell's going to run the company someday." What my father didn't know, what nobody knew, was that I'd made more than one choice that year. 3 months before the wedding, I'd been assigned to work with a client who managed offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Richard Harrington was different from the wealthy clients I typically dealt with. Quiet, meticulous, with glasses that kept sliding down his nose when he got excited about explaining financial regulations. "You see, Miss Thompson," he'd said during our first meeting, "most people think offshore banking is just for tax evasion, but it's so much more sophisticated than that. It's about asset protection, investment diversity, financial privacy." Found myself fascinated, not just by the concept, but by the possibilities it presented. After our third meeting, I asked Richard a question that would change the course of my life. Could I open an account? A small one, just to understand the process better. Richard had studied me for a long moment. "May I ask why?" I remember hesitating, searching for the right words. "Because I'm about to get married," I finally said, "and I need something that's just mine." The initial deposit was modest, $5,000 from the inheritance my grandmother had left me. I'd chosen not to tell Gregory about that money. just as I chose not to tell him when I negotiated my employment contract to deposit 15% of my annual bonus directly into that offshore account. Or when I sold the rare book collection my grandfather had willed to me and added those funds as well. Gregory and I moved into a beautiful colonial in Newport after our honeymoon. He was made partner at my father's firm that same year, just as everyone expected. I left my position as a financial analyst to become, as Gregory put it, the consummate corporate wife. The transition wasn't as difficult as I'd imagined. I threw dinner parties for Gregory's clients, joined the right charitable boards, maintained our social calendar with military precision. I was good at it. The entertaining, the networking, the quiet power that came with being the woman behind a successful man. Eleanor has the perfect life, my friends would say, envy barely concealed in their voices. The house, the husband, the social standing. And from the outside, they were right. Our home was featured in Architectural Digest. Our anniversary parties were covered in the society pages. Gregory's career continued its meteoric rise, culminating in his appointment as CEO when my father retired. What no one saw was how Gregory changed as his influence grew. The charismatic man who'd charmed everyone at our wedding evolved into someone colder, more calculating. Success, it seemed, confirmed what he'd always suspected, that he was better, smarter, more deserving than everyone else. "These people would be nothing without me," he'd say after his executive team left our dinner parties. "They don't have the vision or the guts to make the hard calls." I nodded and poured more wine, playing my part, but inside, I was taking notes. Every arrogant comment, every dismissive gesture, every flash of the temperament he kept hidden from everyone but me, I filed them away like data points, building a complete picture of the man I'd married. We never had children. A mutual decision, or so Gregory told people. The truth was more complicated. I'd wanted children at first, had even gone off birth control during our 3rd year of marriage. But after a particularly vicious argument where Gregory had thrown his briefcase across our bedroom, narrowly missing I quietly went back on the pill. "Kids are a distraction," Gregory said a few months later. "They'd take you away from supporting my career. Besides, you're not exactly the maternal type, Eleanor." I didn't argue. Instead, I called Richard Harrington and transferred another $10,000 to my account. As the years passed, I found other ways to build my secret financial foundation. When Gregory gave me his power of attorney during a health scare in our 10th year of marriage, I used it to purchase dividend-paying stocks in my maiden name. When I inherited my mother's jewelry collection, I sold the pieces Gregory deemed outdated and kept the proceeds for myself. By our 20th anniversary, my offshore account had grown to over $600,000. By our 30th, it exceeded $1.8 million. Every bonus Gregory received, every property we flipped, every investment that paid off. I found ways to skim small amounts that would never be missed from our vast wealth. It wasn't about the money itself. We had more than enough. It was about having options, about maintaining the one thing Gregory had systematically taken from me over the years: choice. In public, we remained the golden couple of Newport society. Gregory's firm managed billions in assets. I sat on the boards of the Symphony, the Art Museum, and the Historical Preservation Society. We hosted fundraisers that raised millions for cancer research, inspired by my father's battle with the disease, which he ultimately lost in 2008. The funeral was the first crack in our perfect facade. Gregory, who had been named successor to my father's controlling interest in the firm, seemed more concerned about the company's transition than my grief. "The board needs reassurance, Eleanor," he said as we drove home from the cemetery. "I need to call an emergency meeting tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" I asked, staring out the window. "We haven't even sorted through Dad's personal effects." Gregory reached over and patted my hand, a gesture that felt more perfunctory than comforting. "The firm is his legacy. Securing it is the best way to honor him. I said nothing, but that night, I made another call to Richard Harrington. I'd like to diversify further, I told him. Real estate, perhaps. Something tangible. Within 6 months, I had purchased a small cottage on the coast of Maine through a shell company. Gregory knew nothing about it. When I needed to visit, I told him I was attending retreats with my women's investment club, a group he found amusing and slightly pathetic. Playing at finance, he called it. Cute that you ladies think you understand the markets. What Gregory didn't know was that our investment club had outperformed his firm's flagship fund 3 years running, or that the retreat was actually my private sanctuary, a place where I could breathe without measuring every inhale against his expectations. It was at that cottage where I first noticed the signs. Small lapses in Gregory's careful persona, receipts for dinners I hadn't attended, weekend conferences with no corresponding materials, late-night calls he took in his study with the door firmly closed. I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I watched and waited, collecting evidence with the same methodical patience I'd applied to building my financial safety net. And when I finally had enough proof to confirm my suspicions, I didn't fall apart as Gregory might have expected. Instead, I made a plan. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The first concrete evidence arrived on a rainy Tuesday in April. I'd been organizing Gregory's home office, something he typically forbade, claiming I would disrupt his system. But he was in London for a week-long conference, and his assistant had called asking for a specific contract that needed to be scanned and sent immediately. It should be in the bottom right drawer of his desk, Melissa had said, her voice tight with stress. Mr. Mitchell will be furious if we don't get this to the Westbrook team by noon. I found the contract easily enough, but as I slid the drawer closed, I noticed a small brass key taped to the underside of the desk. It was old-fashioned, the kind that might open a safety deposit box or a personal safe. In our 40 years together, I'd never seen it before. Curiosity got the better of me. I spent the next hour searching for whatever that key might open, finding nothing in his office. I was about to give up when I remembered the old credenza in our bedroom, a family heirloom, from Gregory's side that I'd always found hideous. He'd insisted on keeping it despite my multiple attempts to redecorate over the years. The key fit perfectly into a hidden panel I'd never noticed before, revealing a small compartment containing a burgundy leather journal. I sat on the edge of our bed and began to read. It wasn't a journal in the traditional sense. There were no daily entries about thoughts or feelings. Instead, it was a meticulous record of payments, dates, amounts, and locations spanning nearly 15 years. Beside each entry was a single initial, V. The most recent entry was from just 2 weeks ago. $4,500, V, Four Seasons, Chicago. Hands didn't shake. My breathing remained steady. After decades of maintaining appearances, my body had learned not to betray me, even when I was alone. I simply took photos of every page with my phone, returned the journal exactly as I'd found it, and locked the compartment. That evening, I called Tracy Sullivan, my closest friend from our investment club. Tracy had divorced her husband of 35, years after discovering his affair with his dental hygienist. "Can we meet tomorrow?" I asked. "I need your advice." We met at a small cafe in Bristol, far enough from Newport to avoid running into mutual acquaintances. Tracy listened without interrupting as I explained what I'd found. "Are you surprised?" she finally asked, stirring her latte with measured precision. The question caught me off guard. I don't know," I admitted. Part of me suspected something wasn't right. Gregory's been distant for years, but I assumed it was just the natural progression of a long marriage. Tracy nodded. "That's what they count on. That we'll mistake their betrayal for routine. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "What do you want to do?" "I don't know that either," I said. "I need more information." What followed was 3 months of careful investigation. I hired a private investigator, a former FBI agent Tracy had used during her divorce, who confirmed my suspicions and provided a name. Vanessa Chambers, a 39-year-old real estate agent who specialized in luxury properties. According to the investigator's report, Gregory had been seeing her for at least 12 years. 12 years, I repeated, staring at the photos spread across my kitchen table after Gregory had left for his weekly golf game. The woman was beautiful, in an obvious way. Blonde hair, perfect smile, the kind of figure that required daily workouts and monthly maintenance. But it wasn't her youth or beauty that struck me most. It was the dates. 12 years. That placed the beginning of their affair right around the time of my mother's funeral. While I had been grieving, Gregory had been starting a relationship with another woman. I remembered how he'd held my hand at the service, how he'd told everyone he needed to take care of me. The memory of his false comfort made my stomach turn. The private investigator had been thorough. He'd documented meetings at hotels, dinners at restaurants in Providence and Boston, even a weekend trip to the Hamptons when Gregory had told me he was meeting with West Coast clients. But most damning of all were the financial records. Gregory had purchased a condominium in downtown Boston's Back Bay neighborhood in Vanessa's name. He'd set up a monthly transfer of $10,000 into an account she controlled. And most recently, he'd created a separate LLC that appeared to be purchasing commercial properties with her as the managing partner. "He's planning for a future with her," the investigator said, his tone professionally neutral. "The question is whether you want to confront him now or gather more evidence for litigation purposes. I chose option 3. I would do nothing. Not yet. Instead, I accelerated my own plans. I increased the percentage of our joint investments being channeled to my offshore account. I consulted with an attorney specializing in high-net-worth divorces, careful to meet her in Boston where Gregory's social circle wouldn't notice, and I began to study state laws regarding marital assets and financial disclosure requirements. Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, my attorney explained during our second meeting. That means the court divides property based on what's fair, not necessarily equally. "And what about assets that Gregory doesn't know exist?" I asked. She gave me a measured look. "Legally, you're required to disclose all assets during divorce proceedings. However," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "what can't be traced effectively doesn't exist in the eyes of the court." I nodded, understanding the implication. My decades of financial discretion had prepared me for this moment. As summer turned to fall, Gregory's behavior began to change. He became more critical of my appearance, more dismissive of my opinions. Subtle jabs about my age, comments about women who age gracefully whenever we encountered someone younger, became more frequent. The groundwork, I realized, for what was coming. "We need to talk," he said one evening in late September. We were sitting in our sunroom, the views of Narragansett Bay particularly beautiful in the fading light. I had been reading a book, and he had just returned from what he claimed was a business dinner. "Of course," I replied, placing a bookmark between the pages and giving him my full attention. The calm in my voice surprised even me. Gregory paced for a moment, then sat in the chair opposite mine. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice practiced, as though he'd rehearsed this speech. "About life. About what I want for my future." I waited, watching him search for words that would cast him in the best possible light. "We've had a good run, Eleanor," he continued. 40 years is a long time. But I think we both know things haven't been passionate between us for years. Passion, I repeated, the word feeling strange on my tongue. "You want more passion." "I want to feel alive again," he said, leaning forward, his expression earnest. "I'm 69 years old. I've built a successful career. amassed wealth, achieved everything I set out to accomplish. But what's it all for if I'm not truly living? I might have been moved if I hadn't seen the text message that had flashed on his phone during dinner the previous night. V. Flight booked for Turks and Caicos, and, can't wait for January. X. And you don't feel alive with me, I stated rather than asked. Gregory had the decency to look uncomfortable. It's not that simple. I think it is, I countered softly. You've found someone who makes you feel young. Again, and you want my permission to pursue that feeling without guilt. His eyes widened slightly. I had deviated from the script he'd anticipated. There is someone, he admitted after a pause. It's recent, he lied. Nothing happened until I was certain about my feelings regarding our marriage. I allowed myself a small smile. How considerate of you. Gregory frowned, his expression hardening. I'm trying to be honest with you, Eleanor, to give you the respect of the truth rather than sneaking around. The irony was almost too much to bear, but I maintained my composure. What exactly are you proposing? A divorce, he said, the words coming easier now. Amicable, of course. I'll be generous with the settlement. You can keep the house. This house, I interrupted, glancing around at the home we'd shared for decades. How magnanimous of you to give me the property that's already half mine. His jaw tightened. I've built everything we have, Eleanor. My firm, my investments, my business acumen. You've been a wonderful wife, but let's be realistic about who created our wealth. And there it was, the truth beneath the practiced speech, and false consideration. In Gregory's mind, everything we had was fundamentally his. My contributions, the networking, the social connections, the careful management of our household and reputation counted for nothing in his ledger. I see, I said simply. When would you like to leave? My easy acquiescence clearly surprised him. He had expected tears, recriminations, perhaps even begging. My calm acceptance threw him off balance. I thought we might take some time to sort through things properly, he stammered. No need to rush. No, I agreed. No need to rush at all. That night, as Gregory slept beside me for what would be one of the last times, I sent an encrypted message to Richard Harrington. Initiate contingency plan Azure. Time frame, 90 days. His response came within minutes, despite the late hour. Understood. All preparations in place. I placed my phone on the nightstand and stared at the ceiling, mentally calculating the steps ahead. Gregory had no idea what was coming, but after 40 years of underestimating me, perhaps that was exactly what he deserved. The next 3 months were a masterclass in patience. I moved through our daily routines with practiced normality, organizing Gregory's social calendar, attending charity functions on his arm, maintaining our home with the same attention to detail I'd always shown. To the outside world, nothing had changed, but beneath this carefully crafted veneer, I was executing the most complex financial operation of my life. My first step was to visit my cottage in Maine under the pretense of another investment club, Retreat. There, I met with Richard Harrington in person for the first time in nearly a decade. He'd aged well, his once dark hair now silver at the temples, but his meticulous attention to detail hadn't changed. The contingency plan has 3 phases, he explained, spreading documents across my kitchen table. Consolidation, conversion, and relocation. The consolidation phase involved gathering assets from various accounts and investments I'd established over the years. Small amounts diverted from joint investments, profits from my own modest trading activities, the proceeds from jewelry and artwork I'd sold, all funneled through a network of shell companies and trusts I'd established across multiple jurisdictions. Your foresight was remarkable, Richard noted, reviewing the structures we'd put in place. Most clients wait until they're already in crisis to begin planning. I've had 40 years to prepare, I replied. The conversion phase was more complex. We needed to transform traceable assets into forms that couldn't be easily tracked or seized during divorce proceedings. Some were converted to cryptocurrency, not Bitcoin or other mainstream options, but privacy-focused alternatives that utilized advanced encryption. Others were invested in physical assets stored outside the United States. Art pieces held in Freeport storage facilities in Singapore, rare stamps secured in vaults in Geneva, and unregistered gold bars in a private repository. In Liechtenstein, the key is diversification, Richard emphasized. No single asset class, no single location, no single jurisdiction. The final phase, relocation, involved establishing a new financial footprint separate from anything connected to Gregory or our shared life. New accounts in countries with strict banking secrecy laws, held under a corporate structure registered in a jurisdiction that didn't share information with U.S. authorities. "Are you planning to leave the country?" Richard asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Not necessarily," I said, "but I want options." Throughout October and November, as New England's foliage transformed from brilliant reds and golds to barren branches, I systematically implemented each phase of our plan, all while maintaining the facade of a dignified wife, preparing to accept her husband's decision with grace. Gregory, meanwhile, grew increasingly impatient with my composure. "You're being remarkably calm about all this," he commented one evening, as we sat through another silent dinner. I expected more resistance. I took a sip of my wine before answering. "What would be the point? You've made your decision," his brow furrowed. "It's not that I don't care about you, Eleanor. We've shared a lifetime together." "Just not the rest of it," I replied evenly. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I've been thinking about the financial arrangements. My attorney suggested—" "We have time to discuss that," I interrupted gently. "You said yourself there's no rush." In truth, I needed to delay any formal proceedings until after the new year, when the final pieces of my plan would be in place. Every week that passed with Gregory believing I was a compliant, perhaps slightly shell-shocked wife was another week to secure my financial independence. During this period, I also took steps to protect myself in ways that went beyond money. I began documenting Gregory's affair meticulously, not just for potential leverage in divorce proceedings, but as insurance against his considerable influence in our community. I hired a second private investigator to look into Vanessa Chambers more thoroughly. What he uncovered was illuminating. She had a pattern of relationships with wealthy, married men. Before Gregory, there had been a hedge fund manager from Greenwich and a real estate developer from Providence. Both relationships had ended with substantial financial settlements. "She's strategic," the investigator explained. "She targets men at specific points in their careers and personal lives, usually when they're achieving peak success but beginning to feel their age." "And then what?" I asked. "She becomes whatever they need, the admiring younger woman, the ambitious protégé, the passionate lover. But it always ends the same way, with property, cash, or business interests changing hands." I digested this information carefully. So Gregory isn't her first project, nor her last, I'd wager, though he's certainly been her longest engagement. This revelation didn't hurt as much as it might have. Instead, it confirmed what I'd already suspected. Gregory wasn't leaving me because he'd found true love. He was leaving because Vanessa had masterfully exploited his vanity and insecurity about aging. The same insecurities I'd watched grow over the decades of our marriage. In early December, I made another critical move. I invited our son Michael and his wife Caroline to dinner. Michael, a successful surgeon in Philadelphia, had always been closer to me than to Gregory, though he maintained a respectful relationship with his father. Our daughter Jennifer lived in Seattle with her wife and rarely made it back east except for major holidays. I broke the news of our impending divorce gently after Gregory had retreated to his study following dessert. "Dad's leaving you?" Michael asked, his fork clattering against his plate. "After 40 years?" Caroline reached for his hand, her expression a mix of shock and concern. "It's his decision," I said calmly. "He's met someone else." Michael's face darkened. "Who?" "Her name is Vanessa Chambers. She's a real estate agent. She's 39. 39, he repeated flatly. Jesus Christ. "Michael," Caroline murmured, a gentle warning in her voice. "No," he insisted, pushing back from the table. "This is absurd. He's throwing away his entire family for a midlife crisis?" "I believe it's called a late-life crisis at his age," I observed dryly. Despite my attempt at humor, Michael was furious. He started toward Gregory's study, but I caught his arm. "Don't," I said firmly. "This isn't your battle." "Mom, you can't. Just let him do this to you." "What about your financial security? The house? Your retirement?" I smiled, genuinely touched by his concern. "I'll be fine, I promise." "But, Michael," I squeezed his arm gently. "Trust me. Your father may be leaving, but I'm not without resources." He studied my face, confusion gradually giving way to curiosity. "What aren't you telling me?" "Many things," I admitted. "But only to protect you. The less you know right now, the better." That night, after they'd gone, I sat alone in our living room considering my next steps. Gregory was planning to move out after Christmas, a timeline he'd chosen to minimize family drama during the holidays. He'd also begun making references to financial discussions, increasingly pointed comments about meeting with his attorneys. He was getting ready to present me with a settlement offer, one that would undoubtedly undervalue my contributions to our marriage and our shared wealth. I needed to be prepared for that moment. 2 weeks before Christmas, I received confirmation that the final phase of my plan had been successfully implemented. My newly established financial structure was secure, diversified, and most importantly, virtually untraceable by conventional means. Richard's message was typically understated. All assets positioned as directed. Contingency plan Azure complete. That same evening, Gregory announced he would be spending Christmas in Aspen. "Alone?" I asked, looking up from my book. He hesitated just long enough for me to know the answer. "I need some time to think. The mountains have always helped clear my head." "Of course," I said mildly. "Will you be using the company jet?" His expression flickered with surprise at my direct question. "Yes. Why?" "Just curious about the details. For the children's sake." Gregory seemed relieved by my continued acquiescence. "I've scheduled a meeting with Wallace Peterson for January 5th, he added, referring to his longtime attorney. "To discuss terms. I think you'll find my offer more than fair." "I'm sure I will," I replied, returning to my book. Little did he know that I'd already scheduled my own meeting with Meredith Lawson, one of the most formidable divorce attorneys in New England. Our appointment was set for January 3rd, 2 days before Gregory's planned ambush. As Christmas approached, I made one final visit to my cottage in Maine. The weather was brutal, snow whipping across the rocky coastline, waves crashing against the shore. I sat by the fireplace with a detailed inventory of every asset I'd secured over the decades, a fortune that now exceeded $8.5 million, all of it beyond Gregory's knowledge or reach. Next to this inventory was another document, a comprehensive accounting of Gregory's financial infidelities. Not just the money he'd spent on Vanessa, but numerous other financial improprieties I'd discovered during my investigation. Questionable tax strategies, undisclosed accounts, manipulated valuations of company assets. If Gregory wanted war, I was armed with enough ammunition to destroy not just his personal reputation, but potentially his professional one as well. But that wasn't my goal. I didn't want revenge. I wanted freedom, on my terms. And as I watched the winter storm rage outside my window, I knew that the life I'd carefully constructed in secret was about to become my new reality. For 40 years, I'd been Eleanor Mitchell, the perfect corporate wife. Come January, the world would meet the real Eleanor, and Gregory wouldn't know what hit him. Christmas passed with practiced civility. Jennifer flew in from Seattle with her wife Emma, and Michael brought his family from Philadelphia. We maintained the charade of normalcy, exchanging gifts beneath a perfectly decorated tree, serving Gregory's favorite crown roast for dinner, sipping eggnog while listening to the carols I'd selected. If the children noticed the tension beneath our polite exchanges, they were kind enough not to mention it during the celebrations. Instead, they filled the house with stories of their own lives: Jennifer's promotion at her tech company, Michael's youngest son's acceptance to Princeton, Emma's new gallery opening. Watching Gregory interact with our family, no one would have guessed he was planning to abandon this life in less than a week. He played the role of patriarch flawlessly, dispensing financial advice to our children, reminiscing about holidays past, even placing his hand on the small of my back as we posed for family photos. "You're a remarkable actress," he whispered when we were momentarily alone in the kitchen. "I learned from the best," I replied, handing him a tray of after-dinner coffees to serve. On December 27th, Gregory departed for Aspen, kissing me on the cheek as though it were any other business trip. I stood on the porch watching his car disappear. Down the driveway, just as I would later watch his final departure in the autumn. The moment his taillights vanished, I went to work. My first call was to Meredith Lawson. "He's gone. We can proceed." My second call was to Richard Harrington. "Confirm final asset positions." Then I contacted a locksmith to change every lock in the house, a security company to upgrade our system with new codes Gregory wouldn't know, and an IT specialist to sweep for any monitoring devices and secure our home network. "Mom, what's going on?" Michael asked when he arrived at the house later that afternoon, finding workers installing new locks and security cameras. I invited him and Caroline into the kitchen, away from listening ears, and poured them each a glass of wine. "Your father isn't coming back after Aspen," I explained calmly. "He's moving in with Vanessa Chambers." Michael's jaw tightened. "So he's really going through with this?" "Yes," I said, "but that's not the whole story." I took a deep breath. "Michael, there are things about my marriage to your father, about our finances that you don't know." Caroline reached for Michael's hand. "Maybe we should give your mother some privacy for this conversation," she suggested. I shook my head. "No, I want you both to hear this. I'm going to need allies in the coming weeks." Over the next hour, I shared a carefully edited version of my financial activities over the decades. Not the full extent, they didn't need that liability, but enough to help them understand what was coming. "You've been planning for this?" Michael asked, his expression a mix of shock and something that might have been admiration. "Not specifically for Gregory leaving," I clarified, "but for the possibility that I might someday need financial independence." "All these years," he said softly, "you never said anything. What was there to say?" "By the way, son, I've been diverting money into secret accounts for decades just in case your father betrays me." He winced. "When you put it that way, the important thing now," I continued, "is that Gregory thinks I'm financially dependent on him. He's expecting me to accept whatever settlement he offers because I have no alternative." Caroline leaned forward. "But you do." "I do," I confirmed. "And more than that, I have evidence of financial misconduct that could cause serious problems for him, with the IRS, with the SEC, with his clients." Michael's eyes widened. "Are you planning to expose him?" "Only if necessary," I said. "I'd prefer a clean, quiet resolution, but I'm prepared for other scenarios." After they left, I spent the evening reviewing documents with Meredith Lawson via secure video conference. Tall, sharp-featured, with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, Meredith had represented 3 of Boston's most high-profile divorces in recent years. "You've done extraordinary preparation work, Eleanor," she said. clearly impressed as she examined the financial evidence I'd compiled. Most clients come to me in a panic with no documentation. I've had time, I replied. And foresight, she added. These offshore structures are particularly well designed, almost impossible to trace back to you. Almost? She smiled thinly. Nothing is foolproof when determined forensic accountants get involved. But your arrangements would withstand significant scrutiny. Will I need to disclose them? Meredith's expression turned serious. Legally, yes. All marital assets must be disclosed during divorce proceedings. I waited, knowing there was more. However, she continued, what constitutes a marital asset can be subject to interpretation, especially with funds that were separated decades ago, in small amounts, from sources that could be considered premarital or personal inheritances. And the offshore accounts? More complicated, she admitted, but not insurmountable, especially given what you've shown me about Gregory's own financial creativity. We spent the next 3 hours formulating our strategy. By the time we finished, I had a clear roadmap for the coming confrontation. The next few days passed in a blur of activity. I gathered financial records, backed up digital files, and secured physical documents in a safe deposit box only I could access. I scheduled appointments with our family banker, our accountant, and our investment advisor, all of whom had primarily dealt with Gregory over the years. I'm taking a more active role in our finances, I explained to each of them, my tone pleasant but firm, given Gregory's increased travel schedule. None questioned this explanation. After all, I was Eleanor Mitchell, reliable corporate wife of nearly 40 years. What reason would they have to doubt me? On New Year's Eve, I received a text from Gregory. Heading back tomorrow. Peterson meeting still scheduled for the 5th. Hope you've had time to think about our future arrangements. I replied with deliberate ambiguity. Looking forward to resolving everything. That night, I stood on our back porch overlooking Narragansett Bay, watching fireworks explode over Newport Harbor. 40 years ago, Gregory and I had watched similar fireworks from this same spot, his arm around my waist, both of us filled with plans for the future. Now I stood alone, wrapped in a cashmere shawl against the winter chill, contemplating a different kind of future, one entirely of my own making. Gregory returned the following afternoon. He seemed surprised to find me calmly reading in the living room, a fire crackling in the grate. You've been redecorating, he observed, noticing the new security keypads and unfamiliar artwork on the walls. Just refreshing things, I replied. New year, new perspective. He set down his luggage. I trust you had a good holiday after everyone left. Productive, I said simply. Gregory nodded, then glanced at his watch. I have some calls to make. We can talk about the Peterson meeting over dinner. Actually, I countered smoothly, I've made dinner reservations at Castle Hill. I thought, we might discuss our situation somewhere neutral. A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. I had never been the one to suggest dining out. That had always been Gregory's domain, his chance to be seen and acknowledged at the finest establishments. Castle Hill, he repeated. At this time of year? They opened specially for New Year's week. I thought it would be appropriate. For our last dinner as husband and wife. His expression hardened slightly. You seem to have accepted the situation. I've had time to process it, I agreed, and to make some decisions of my own. Gregory studied me for a moment, perhaps sensing something different in my demeanor, but then nodded. What time is the reservation? 7:30. Fine, I'll be ready. Castle Hill Inn stood majestically on its promontory, lights glowing warmly against the winter darkness. The dining room was nearly empty, just a few other couples seated far from our table overlooking the water. I had requested privacy, and the maitre d', who had known us for decades, had been happy to oblige. Gregory ordered his usual Macallan 18, neat. I chose champagne. Celebrating? he asked, one eyebrow raised. In a manner of speaking, I replied, raising my glass slightly. To new beginnings. He clinked his glass against mine, a measured smile on his face. I'm glad you're approaching this reasonably, Eleanor. It will make the transition easier for everyone. Including Vanessa? I asked mildly. Gregory paused, his glass halfway to his lips. You know about her. I know a great deal about her, I confirmed. Her background, her previous relationships with married men, the property you purchased for her in Back Bay, the commercial properties you've been acquiring together through Meridian Holdings, LLC. The color drained from his face. How did you— Does it matter? I interrupted gently. What matters is that I'm fully informed, Gregory, about everything. He set his glass down carefully. If you're attempting to threaten me— Not at all, I assured him. I'm simply establishing that I'm entering our legal discussions with complete information. It will save time. Gregory's jaw tightened, the muscles working beneath his skin. Wallace has prepared a very generous settlement offer. More than fair, considering Massachusetts law. I smiled. I'm sure he has. And I'm equally sure it doesn't accurately reflect my contributions to our marriage or our shared assets. Your contributions? He scoffed, abandoning pretense. Eleanor, I built everything we have. The firm, the investments, the properties, all of it came from my work, my expertise. Did it? I asked quietly. Or did it come from our partnership? My social connections that brought you clients. My management of our household that allowed you to focus entirely on your career. My discretion about your lengthy affair with Vanessa, which, had it become public earlier, might have damaged your standing with more conservative clients. Gregory's expression darkened. That's an interesting perspective, but ultimately irrelevant to the legal realities. Actually, I countered, I've been consulting with Meredith Lawson about those legal realities. His hand froze on his whiskey glass. Meredith Lawson, the divorce attorney? The very same. You've retained counsel without discussing it with me first? I laughed softly. Did you discuss retaining Wallace Peterson with me? Gregory's mouth thinned to a hard line. This is going to get unnecessarily contentious if you're bringing Lawson into it. It doesn't have to be, I said calmly. I have a counter-proposal to whatever Wallace is planning to present on the 5th. A counter-proposal, he repeated flatly. Yes, I said, reaching into my handbag and retrieving a sealed envelope. My terms. I slid it across the table. Gregory stared at it, not touching it. Open it, I suggested. I think you'll find it quite enlightening. Gregory stared at the envelope for several long seconds before finally reaching for it. His fingers, I noticed, weren't entirely steady. The first visible crack in his carefully maintained composure. He broke the seal and extracted the single sheet of heavy cream stationery. As he read, his expression shifted from wary curiosity to disbelief, then to something approaching alarm. When he looked up, his face had lost its characteristic confidence. This is absurd, he said, his voice low but sharp. 60% of all assets? Control of the Newport property and the vacation. Home in Nantucket? A seat on the board of Mitchell Financial? Have you lost your mind? I sipped my champagne, allowing the moment to stretch before responding. Not at all. I've simply calculated the actual value of my contributions to our partnership. Partnership? Gregory's laugh was harsh. Eleanor, you were a housewife. A very good one, I'll grant you. But your contribution doesn't entitle you to the majority of assets I built through my expertise. Ah, but that's where you're mistaken, I replied calmly. I wasn't just a housewife. I was the architect of your social capital. I cultivated the relationships that brought in the Whitley account, the Perkins Family Trust, the Westchester Pension, Fund. Shall I continue? Those accounts alone represent nearly 40% of your firm's current portfolio. Gregory's mouth tightened. Making introductions at cocktail parties hardly qualifies as Then there's the matter of your financial irregularities, I continued as if he hadn't spoken. The questionable valuation methods used for the Riverstone property deal, the unreported income from the Singapore consultancy, the creative accounting on your last 3 tax returns. The color drained from his face. You're bluffing. In response, I reached into my handbag again and withdrew a flash drive, placing it gently on the table between us. Everything is documented here. Copies are in secure locations with instructions for distribution should anything happen to me, or should you decide to contest my terms. Gregory stared at the flash drive as if it might burst into flames. You've been spying on me. I prefer to think of it as protecting my interests, I corrected. Something you taught me the importance of, albeit indirectly. A waiter approached with our appetizers, and we fell silent until he departed. Gregory immediately reached for his whiskey, draining half the glass in one swallow. What do you want, Eleanor? He asked finally, his voice rough. Really want? Exactly what's outlined in that document, I replied. A fair division of assets, recognition of my role in building our fortune, and a clean break that allows us both to move forward with dignity. And if I refuse? I met his gaze steadily. Then Meredith Lawson files for divorce tomorrow morning, citing adultery, financial misconduct, and fraudulent asset concealment. The evidence will be presented to the court and potentially to regulatory authorities. Gregory's jaw worked silently for several seconds. You would destroy everything? 4 decades of reputation, our family's standing, the firm's credibility with clients? I would prefer not to, I said truthfully, which is why I'm offering you this private arrangement instead of going directly to court. The choice is yours. He studied me with new eyes, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. How long have you been planning this? Planning implies, I anticipated your betrayal, I replied. I didn't, but I did prepare for contingencies throughout our marriage. Contingencies, he repeated flatly. Is that what you call secretly monitoring your husband's business dealings? Is that worse than secretly maintaining a mistress for 12 years? I countered, my voice finally showing a hint of the anger I'd suppressed for months. Gregory flinched. For a moment, something like shame flickered across his features, quickly replaced by calculation. I could almost see him running scenarios in his mind, searching for leverage, for escape routes. These terms would cripple me financially, he said eventually. Hardly. You'd retain 40% of our assets, more than enough for a comfortable life with Vanessa. Although, I added, allowing myself a small smile, you might want to reconsider the prenuptial agreement she's expecting, given her history with the hedge fund manager from Greenwich. His head snapped up. What are you talking about? Oh, Gregory, I said with feigned surprise. Surely you've looked into her background, the pattern of relationships with wealthy men, the significant settlements she's negotiated in the past? From his expression, it was clear he hadn't. Another miscalculation from a man who prided himself on thorough due diligence in every business matter. Vanessa loves me, he insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. I'm sure she does, I agreed mildly. But love and financial strategy aren't mutually exclusive, something I've learned firsthand. Our entrees arrived, interrupting the tension. I cut into my seared scallops with precise movements, determined to maintain normalcy despite the seismic conversation unfolding between us. Gregory ignored his meal entirely, staring instead at the document I'd presented. I need time to think, he said finally. To consult with Wallace. Of course, I conceded. You have until tomorrow at noon. After that, Meredith proceeds with the court filing. 24 hours? He protested. That's hardly enough time to evaluate these demands properly. You've had 40 years to evaluate my worth to this marriage, I reminded him. I'm simply asking you to do it accurately now. The rest of dinner passed in strained silence. Gregory barely touched his food, while I ate with deliberate pleasure, savoring each bite as if it were a small victory. When the bill came, I reached for it before he could. "My treat," I said, slipping my credit card into the leather folder. He flinched again, recognition dawning. "That's not our joint card." "No," I confirmed. "It's my personal account." "Since when do you have a personal account?" "Since 1987, I replied simply. The drive home was silent, Gregory staring out the passenger window while I navigated the familiar roads with steady hands. At home, he immediately retreated to his study, phone already in hand, undoubtedly calling Wallace Peterson despite the late hour. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea and settled in the sunroom with a book, though I wasn't really reading. Instead, I listened to the muffled sounds of Gregory's increasingly agitated voice through the closed study door. Occasionally, I caught fragments. Offshore accounts, blackmail, impossible demands. Around midnight, the study door finally opened. Gregory emerged looking haggard, his usual polished appearance rumpled by hours of tense conversation. "Wallace wants to meet with both legal teams tomorrow," he announced without preamble. 10 a.m. at his office. "That works for my schedule," I replied, closing my book. "I'll inform Meredith." Gregory stood awkwardly in the doorway, clearly still struggling to reconcile the compliant wife he'd taken for granted with the strategic opponent now before him. "How did you do it?" he asked suddenly. "Hide all this for so long?" I considered my answer carefully. "You only saw what you expected to see, Gregory. You expected an ornamental wife who managed your social calendar and hosted your dinner parties, so that's all you looked for." "And the money? The offshore accounts?" "Small amounts over many years," I explained. "Never enough to notice in our overall finances." He shook his head, something like reluctant admiration crossing his features. "All this time, I thought I knew you." "No," I said gently. "You never really tried to." The next morning, I dressed with particular care. A tailored navy suit I'd purchased in Boston, pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother, subtle makeup that emphasized my bone structure, rather than attempting to conceal my age. I wanted to project confidence and capability, not desperation or anger. Gregory, too, had armored himself in his finest custom suit, though it couldn't disguise the shadows under his eyes or the tension in his jaw. We drove separately to the meeting, symbolic of our new separate paths. Wallace Peterson's office occupied the top floor of a gleaming tower in downtown Providence. The conference room overlooked the river, sunlight streaming through floor to ceiling. Windows. Wallace himself, silver-haired, impeccably dressed with the smooth manner of someone accustomed to managing wealth, greeted me with practiced cordiality. "Mrs. Mitchell, a pleasure as always." "Mr. Peterson," I responded with equal formality. Meredith Lawson arrived precisely on time, her tailored black pantsuit and sleek bob projecting no-nonsense efficiency. She set her briefcase on the table with a decisive click. "Shall we begin?" she suggested without preamble. The next 3 hours were among the most intense of my life. Wallace presented Gregory's initial offer, a 70-30 split in Gregory's favor, with me retaining the Newport house and a modest monthly stipend. Meredith countered with our full demands, methodically walking through my contributions to our joint success and the evidence of Gregory's financial improprieties. As she spoke, I watched Gregory's face. The shock had worn off, replaced by cold calculation. He whispered occasionally to Wallace, who nodded and made notes. When Meredith finished her presentation, Wallace requested a private consultation with his client. "Of course," Meredith agreed, smoothly. "Eleanor and I will wait in the reception area." As we stepped out, Gregory caught my eye. For a moment, something passed between us. Not affection, certainly, but perhaps a flicker of recognition. We had been worthy adversaries all along, though only one of us had known it. In the reception area, Meredith squeezed my arm lightly. "You're doing beautifully," she murmured. "Stay composed. They're rattled." 20 minutes later, we were called. Back in. Wallace's expression was grave, Gregory's unreadable. We have a counter-proposal, Wallace announced, sliding a document across the table. Meredith reviewed it carefully, then passed it to me. The terms were surprisingly close to my demands. A 55-45 split in my favor, control of both properties, a seat on the board with limited voting rights. This is a starting point for negotiation, Wallace added, but as you can see, we're prepared to be reasonable. Meredith looked at me, an eyebrow slightly raised. This was my decision, I studied. Gregory across the polished expanse of mahogany. This man I'd shared my life with for 4 decades. The father of my children. My partner in success and failure. I felt no triumph in his capitulation, only a quiet certainty that I was finally claiming what had always been partly mine. Let's continue, I said. The negotiations continued for 5 more hours. By late afternoon, both legal teams were surrounded by coffee cups and discarded drafts as we hammered out every detail of our separation. The sun had begun its winter descent, casting long shadows across the conference room when we finally reached an agreement. I believe we have the framework of a settlement, Wallace announced, his voice betraying the fatigue of the marathon session. My office will draw up the formal documents for review by the end of the week. Meredith nodded, her sharp eyes scanning her notes one final time. That's acceptable. We'll expect the draft by Friday. Gregory sat back in his chair, loosening his tie with one finger. He looked exhausted but resigned, a man who had come to terms with an unforeseen reality. Is that it, then? He asked, directing the question not to the attorneys but to me. For today, I replied. As we gathered our things to leave, Wallace pulled Gregory aside for a private word. Meredith used the opportunity to speak softly in my ear. You realize this is an extraordinary result, she said. Most clients in your position would be fighting for 35%. Most clients don't spend 40 years preparing, I replied. Her lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Indeed. Outside, the January air was bitter cold, biting through my wool coat as I crossed the parking garage to my car. I heard footsteps behind me and turned to find Gregory following, his collar turned up against the chill. Eleanor, wait. I paused, beside my vehicle, keys in hand. Yes? He stopped a few feet away, hands shoved deep in his coat pockets. I just need to understand something. I waited, saying nothing. Was it all a lie? He asked finally. Our marriage, the life we built, was it just strategy for you? The question caught me off guard. In all the months of planning, I hadn't anticipated this moment. Gregory seeking meaning rather than advantage. No, I said after a moment. Not at the beginning. I loved you once. Very much. When did it change? I considered my answer carefully. It wasn't a single moment. It was a gradual erosion. Every time you dismissed my opinions. Every time you chose your ambitions over our partnership. Every time you made me feel invisible. Gregory flinched. I provided everything you could have. Wanted. Except respect, I countered gently. Except genuine partnership. He looked away, his gaze fixed on some distant point beyond the concrete walls. And Vanessa? Was the final confirmation of what I already knew, I said. That I would never be your priority. Gregory nodded slowly, absorbing this. When he looked back at me, his expression had shifted from defensiveness to something closer to regret. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I did love you. In my way. I know, I replied. That's the tragedy of it. We stood there for a moment, 4 decades of shared history suspended between us like a delicate, irreparable vase. Then Gregory straightened his shoulders, his mask of confidence slipping back into place. Wallace thinks we can expedite the process, he said, his tone businesslike. Once more. Have everything finalized within 2 months. That would be best, I agreed. For everyone. He hesitated, then asked, "Will you tell the children about everything? The offshore accounts? The investigation?" I considered this. No, they don't need to know the details. Only that we've reached an amicable arrangement. Relief flickered across his features. Thank you for that, at least. We parted with a formality that belied our decades together. No embrace, not even a handshake. Just a brief nod of acknowledgement before he turned and walked toward his own car, his figure silhouetted against the harsh fluorescent lighting of the garage. I watched him go, feeling neither triumph nor sorrow, only a profound sense of closure. Shy. Following weeks unfolded with surprising efficiency. Gregory moved out permanently 3 days after our meeting, taking only his personal belongings and a few items we'd agreed he could claim. I helped him pack his books and records, working alongside him in a strange, silent dance around the rooms we'd shared for so long. "You don't have to do this," he said at one point, watching me carefully wrap his first edition Hemingway in acid-free paper. "I know," I replied, "but it seems fitting to end with the same care we began." He didn't respond, but I caught the flash of emotion in his eyes before he looked away. Once Gregory was settled in the Boston condominium he'd previously purchased for Vanessa, she had moved to a newer, larger apartment in the same building, the real work of disentangling our lives began. Financial accounts were separated, asset transfers arranged, legal documents signed and notarized. Throughout it all, I maintained a calm efficiency that seemed to unnerve everyone around me. Bankers who had previously addressed all their questions to Gregory now looked at me with new respect, and perhaps a touch of wariness. Our accountant, who had handled our taxes for 20 years, discovered that I understood complex tax strategies better than he had anticipated. "You have quite a head for finance, Mrs. Mitchell," he remarked during one particularly detailed meeting. "Eleanor," I corrected. "And yes, I've always found numbers fascinating." As news of our separation filtered through Newport society, I weathered the inevitable storm of gossip with grace. I declined invitations for the first few weeks, allowing the initial whispers to subside. When I finally emerged for the hospital charity gala in late February, I chose a midnight blue gown I'd never worn before, sleek, modern, and decidedly unlike anything I'd selected as Gregory's wife. "Eleanor, you look stunning," said Margaret Whitaker, one of Newport's most prominent socialites, air-kissing my cheeks. "We've all been so worried about you, darling. Such a shock about Gregory." "Thank you for your concern," I replied smoothly, "but I'm doing quite well." Her perfectly sculpted eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you? Really? After 40 years? I sipped my champagne, meeting her curious gaze directly. "Life continues, Margaret, sometimes in unexpected directions." By March, the divorce was finalized with remarkably little drama. The terms we'd negotiated remained largely intact. I received 55% of our joint assets, both properties, and a seat on the board of Mitchell Financial. Gregory retained his position as CEO, but would need board approval for major decisions, a considerable check on his previously unchallenged authority. On the day the final papers were signed, Meredith took me to lunch at her private club in Boston, a wood-paneled sanctuary high above the city where powerful women gathered away from prying eyes. "To new beginnings," she toasted, raising her glass. "And hard-won wisdom," I added. She studied me over the rim of her wineglass. "What will you do now? With your freedom, your assets?" It was a question I'd been contemplating for months. "Travel, certainly. There are places I've always wanted to see, Kyoto in cherry blossom season, the northern lights in Norway, the markets of Marrakech." "Alone?" she asked, her tone neutral. "At first," I acknowledged. "I need to rediscover who Eleanor Thompson Mitchell is when she's not defined by her marriage. And after that?" I smiled. "I'm considering establishing a foundation, something to help women achieve financial independence. Meredith nodded approvingly. A fitting legacy. Not a legacy, I corrected. A beginning. In April, as spring began to soften Newport's sharp edges, I received an unexpected visitor. Michael arrived unannounced one Sunday afternoon, looking somewhat uncomfortable as he stood on my doorstep. "Mom, do you have a minute? There's something I need to ask you." I invited him in, leading him to the sunroom where the afternoon light created pools of warmth on the newly reupholstered furniture. I'd been systematically redecorating the house, removing traces of Gregory's taste and replacing them with pieces. That reflected my own aesthetic. "The place looks different," Michael observed, glancing around. "Good different." "Thank you," I said, pouring him tea from the Japanese cast-iron teapot I'd recently purchased. "What did you want to ask me?" He hesitated, turning the delicate cup in his hands. "Dad called me yesterday. He mentioned something about you taking a position on the board of the firm." "That's correct." He seemed unsettled by it. "Said you'd never shown interest in the business before." I couldn't help but smile. "I've always been interested, Michael. Your father simply never noticed." Michael studied me with new eyes, the same searching look Gregory had given me in the parking garage. "You're different now," he said finally. "Since the divorce?" "Not different," I corrected gently. "Just more visible. The person I've always been is now on the outside rather than carefully hidden away." He nodded slowly, processing this. "Dad also mentioned offshore accounts. Something about you having secret finances for years. Is that true?" I set down my teacup, considering how much to reveal to my son. "I maintained separate financial resources throughout our marriage," I said carefully. "It was a form of security." "For 40 years?" His tone held disbelief. "Women of my generation had few protections, Michael. I created my own safety net." He seemed to struggle with this concept. "But you and Dad? I always thought you had the perfect marriage." "We had the marriage your father wanted," I replied, "and the one I accepted until I couldn't anymore." Michael fell silent, his expression troubled. I reached across and covered his hand with mine. "This doesn't change who I was as your mother," I said softly. "Only who I was as Gregory's wife." Slowly, he nodded. "I think I understand. It's a lot to process." "Take all the time you need," I assured him. "I've had decades to come to terms with these decisions." After Michael left, I walked through the quiet rooms of my home, truly mine now in both deed and spirit. The evening light cast long shadows across newly arranged furniture, fresh paint colors, artwork I'd selected for my pleasure alone. For the first time since Gregory's departure, I felt a surge of pure, uncomplicated joy. That night, I opened my laptop and revisited the travel itinerary I'd been crafting. Kyoto in April for the cherry blossoms, then the Greek islands in May, Norway, in June to see the midnight sun. After decades of planning vacations around Gregory's conference schedule and client meetings, the freedom to follow my own curiosity felt almost decadent. As I finalized my bookings, an email notification appeared, a message from Richard Harrington, confirming that the last of my offshore assets had been successfully transferred to my new financial structure. "All accounts secured," he wrote. "Contingency plan, Azure complete. Congratulations, Eleanor." I smiled at the screen, then typed a simple reply. "Time for contingency plan, freedom to begin." Kyoto in April was everything I had imagined, and more. The ancient temples framed by explosions of pink cherry blossoms, the perfectly raked Zen gardens, the ceremonies of tea houses where time seemed to slow to the deliberate pace of tradition. I had booked a small ryokan in the historic Gion district, where I woke each morning to sliding paper doors and futons rolled out on tatami mats. "First time in Japan?" asked Keiko, the elderly proprietress, on my third morning as she served traditional breakfast in my room. "Yes," I replied, Though I've wanted to visit for decades, she smiled, her face a map of gentle wrinkles. Sometimes, the most beautiful journeys are those we wait for. In her simple observation, I found unexpected wisdom. Throughout my marriage, I had deferred countless dreams, places I longed to explore, experiences I wanted to have, passions I'd set aside. Always, there was a reason to wait. Gregory's career, social obligations, the expectations of our position in Newport society. Now, as I wandered through Kyoto's narrow alleyways and magnificent temples, I found myself shedding layers of who I had been, like a tree releasing dried leaves to make room for new growth. I stopped wearing makeup most days. I traded my carefully curated wardrobe for comfortable linen pants and soft scarves purchased from local artisans. I let my carefully maintained shoulder-length bob grow out, revealing strands of silver I had dutifully colored every 3 weeks for the past 15 years. I took photographs not to document my presence in famous places, but to capture moments of beauty that moved me. An ancient maple tree with roots cascading down stone steps. An elderly couple sharing dango sweets on a park bench. The perfect spiral of incense smoke rising at Kiyomizu-dera Temple. One evening, seated alone at a tiny restaurant recommended by Keiko, I found myself in conversation with a retired American professor who had been living in Japan for 20 years. "What brings you to Kyoto?" he asked, his kind eyes crinkling behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Freedom," I replied without thinking. He nodded, as if this were the most natural answer in the world. "Ah, the most elusive destination." We shared a bottle of sake as he told me about leaving his tenured position at MIT to pursue his fascination with Japanese literature. How his colleagues had called it career suicide. How his family had been bewildered by his choice. "But you see," he said, gesturing with his sake cup, "life is too short to sacrifice your true curiosities on the altar of others' expectations." I thought about that conversation often as my journey continued from Japan to Greece. Instead of staying at the luxury resorts Gregory would have insisted upon, I chose a simple whitewashed villa on Paros, away from the cruise ship crowds of Santorini and Mykonos. I spent mornings swimming in the crystalline Aegean and afternoons reading books I'd always meant to finish, seated at a small taverna where the owner, Costas, soon greeted me by name. "Kyria Eleanor, your usual table is waiting." My usual became a small glass of ouzo, a Greek salad with excess feta, a luxury I would never have indulged in under Gregory's critical eye, and whatever book had captured my interest that day. Sometimes I wrote in a leather-bound journal I'd purchased in Kyoto, not recording activities as I once would have for our meticulous family albums, but exploring thoughts and feelings I'd suppressed for decades. In Norway, I pushed further beyond my comfort zone, joining a small tour group to view the midnight sun above the Arctic Circle. The other travelers were decades younger, backpackers and adventure seekers in their 20s and 30s, yet they welcomed me without the condescension I had feared. "Eleanor's the one to watch," laughed Sarah, a 30-year-old environmental scientist from Toronto, as I scrambled up a rocky path more nimbly than most of the group. "She's putting us all to shame." We camped under skies that never fully darkened, sharing stories around driftwood fires on remote beaches. I told them about my divorce, though not about the offshore accounts or the decades of financial strategy. Those details remained private, a chess game whose moves mattered less than its outcome. "So what's next for you?" asked Javier, a Spanish photographer documenting Arctic climate change, as we watched ribbons of pale green aurora dance across the twilight sky. "I'm not entirely sure," I admitted. "I've spent so long planning how to get out that I haven't fully imagined what comes after." "Sometimes the best adventures are unplanned," he said, adjusting his camera settings to capture the ethereal light. I nodded, watching the aurora shift and shimmer. I'm beginning to understand that. By September, when I finally returned to Newport, I was physically and mentally transformed. My skin had a healthy glow from months in the Mediterranean sun. My hair, now shoulder length with dignified streaks of silver, was usually pulled back in a simple knot. My posture, always correct due to years of Gregory's reminders about appropriate presentation, had softened into something more natural, more authentically mine. News of my return spread quickly through Newport's close-knit social circles. Within days, my phone began ringing with invitations, some sincere, others clearly motivated by curiosity about the woman who had divorced Gregory Mitchell and apparently thrived. I accepted selectively, choosing smaller gatherings with people I genuinely enjoyed. At a dinner party hosted by Tracy Sullivan, I encountered Wallace Peterson for the first time since the divorce. "Eleanor," he greeted me, surprise evident in his voice as he took in my transformed appearance. "You look remarkable." "Thank you, Wallace," I replied, accepting a glass of wine from a passing server. "How are things at the firm?" He hesitated, clearly weighing his words carefully. "Challenging. Gregory has been, let's say, adjusting to the new board oversight requirements." I smiled faintly. "I imagine he finds it quite constraining." "Indeed, particularly when the quarterly reports are due for board review." His expression grew more serious. "You haven't attended any meetings yet?" "No," I acknowledged. "I've been traveling. But I'll be at the October session." Wallace studied me with professional assessment. "Do you intend to be an active board member? Most ex-wives in your position would be content with the dividends and status." "I've never aspired to be like most ex-wives, Wallace," I replied mildly. "And yes, I intend to be quite active. I've spent 40 years observing how Mitchell Financial operates. I have some thoughts on improvements." His eyebrows rose slightly. "Gregory won't like that." "Gregory's preferences are no longer my primary concern," I said, my tone pleasant but firm. The October board meeting was exactly as awkward as I'd anticipated. Gregory sat at the head of the conference table, his expression carefully neutral as I entered. Several board members looked uncomfortable, clearly uncertain about the new dynamic. I had prepared meticulously, reviewing the firm's quarterly reports, market positions, and client portfolio performance. When Gregory finished his CEO presentation, a polished recitation of relative successes with strategic omissions of concerning trends, I waited for the perfunctory call for questions. "Eleanor?" Gregory acknowledged me with cool professionalism. "You have a question?" "Several, actually," I replied, opening the leather portfolio I'd brought. "Your presentation didn't address the underperformance of the European Equity Fund relative to its benchmark, or the concerning outflows from the income-oriented products." A ripple of surprise moved through the room. Gregory's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Those are operational details we typically address in committee," he said dismissively. "Perhaps," I agreed. "But they impact overall firm performance, which is the board's purview." I turned to the other members. Page 37 of the supplemental materials shows a pattern of client withdrawals that suggests deeper issues with our fixed income strategy. Several directors quickly flipped to the referenced page, expressions shifting from skepticism to concern as they reviewed the data. "How did you?" Gregory began, then stopped himself. "We're developing a revised approach to address those temporary setbacks." "I'd be interested to hear the details," I said, my tone pleasant but persistent. "Perhaps at next month's investment committee meeting?" He had no choice but to agree. As the meeting concluded, I felt the weight of evaluating gazes, some admiring, others wary. I had entered the room as Gregory Mitchell's ex-wife and left as Eleanor Mitchell, board member with uncomfortable questions and sharp insights. In the elevator afterward, Gregory and I found ourselves momentarily alone. "That was quite a performance," he said, his voice tight. "Where exactly did you develop this sudden expertise in asset management?" I met his gaze evenly. "It was never sudden, Gregory. I've been reading your reports and market analyses for decades. Did you think I was just filing them away without understanding them? The elevator doors opened before he could respond. I stepped out with a brief nod, leaving him staring after me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, something between irritation and dawning respect. That evening, alone in my study, I finalized the paperwork for the Eleanor Thompson Mitchell Foundation. Its mission was both personal and purposeful, to provide financial education and resources to women seeking economic independence, particularly those in long-term marriages contemplating significant life changes. The foundation would offer workshops on financial literacy, one-on-one counseling on asset protection, and scholarships for women returning to education after raising families. I seeded it with $10 million from my offshore accounts, funds that had once represented security and now symbolized opportunity for others. As I signed the documents, my phone chimed with a text message from Jennifer. "Mom, heard about your board meeting debut from Dad." He sounded shocked. "I'm not. Always knew you were brilliant. Can Emma and I visit next weekend? Want to hear all about your travels." I smiled, typing back a quick affirmative. Later that night, I stood on my back porch overlooking the bay, watching the rhythm of the lighthouse beams sweeping across the dark water. The autumn air carried a crisp promise of change, of seasons turning inexorably toward new beginnings. In the distance, I could see the lights of Gregory's new Back Bay apartment building across the harbor, smaller and dimmer than our home had been. I felt no satisfaction in this visual metaphor, only a quiet acknowledgement that some journeys are circular while others move forward in entirely new directions. My phone buzzed again, an email notification from Richard Harrington with the subject line, "Final transfer complete." With this message, the last connection to my financial past was severed. The contingency plans, the secret accounts, the careful preparations, all had served their purpose. Now I faced something both more frightening and more exhilarating, a future limited only by my own imagination. I raised my glass of wine in a silent toast to the woman I had been, the careful strategist who had protected her future self, and to the woman I was becoming, step by deliberate step. The Eleanor Thompson Mitchell Foundation launched on a crisp November morning with little fanfare but significant purpose. I had deliberately kept the inauguration small, just a gathering of carefully selected women at a downtown Providence community center where our first financial literacy workshop would be held. "Welcome," I said, standing before the group of 30 women ranging in age from their 30s to their 70s. "Today marks the beginning of something I believe is essential. A path to financial independence for women who have been led to believe that money is not their domain." In the audience, I spotted familiar faces from Newport society, alongside women from more modest backgrounds, all united by a common need to take control of their financial futures. Tracy Sullivan sat in the front row, her encouraging smile bolstering me as I outlined the foundation's mission. Whether you're contemplating divorce, facing widowhood, or simply want to understand the resources you already have, this foundation exists to provide you with tools, not just advice, I explained. Because financial knowledge isn't just about security, it's about freedom. The workshop proved more emotional than I had anticipated. As our financial counselors walked the women through basic concepts of asset protection and investment strategies, I witnessed numerous revelations, some painful, some empowering, flash across their faces. "I've been married for 28 years," shared one participant during our discussion circle. "My husband handles everything financial. I don't even know how much is in our checking account." She paused, tears welling. "What does that say about me?" "It says nothing about you," I responded gently. "And everything about a system designed to keep women dependent." Another woman, probably in her 60s, spoke up. "My husband died last year, left me with plenty of money but no idea how to manage it. His brother keeps offering to handle everything for me." Her voice hardened. But I don't want to replace one man controlling my finances with another. I want to understand this myself. By the end of the day, as the women exchanged contact, information, and made plans to attend future sessions, I felt a sense of purpose more profound than anything I'd experienced in decades. This wasn't charity, it was transformation, one woman at a time. Meredith Lawson joined me for dinner that evening at a small restaurant near her office. "To a successful launch," she toasted, raising her glass. "Though I must say, Eleanor, when most of my clients get substantial divorce settlements, their first instinct isn't usually to give away millions." I smiled. "I'm not giving it away. I'm investing it." "In other women's independence," she noted with approval. "A worthy cause." "In a more practical sense," I added, "the foundation also legitimizes my financial acumen. It's harder for Gregory or the other board members to dismiss me as a decorative ex-wife when I'm running a multi-million-dollar foundation." Meredith's eyes gleamed with appreciation for the strategy. "You're still playing chess while they're playing checkers." "Always," I acknowledged with a small smile. News of the foundation spread quickly through New England's financial and social circles. I received calls from women's organizations requesting partnerships, from financial institutions offering support and seeking positive publicity, and from journalists interested in my story. I declined most interview requests, preferring to keep the focus on the foundation's mission rather than my personal journey. But when the Boston Globe proposed a feature on financial literacy for women, focusing on the foundation's work rather than my divorce, I cautiously agreed. The reporter, a thoughtful woman in her 40s named Diane Levinson, met me at my Newport home. "This is quite a beautiful property," she remarked as I showed her to the sunroom for our conversation. "Thank you," I replied. "It's been in my family for 40 years, though only recently has it truly felt like mine." Diane nodded, setting up her recorder. "That's what I find interesting about your story, Mrs. Mitchell." "Eleanor, please." "Eleanor, many women in your position, wealthy, privileged, coming out of a long marriage, might simply enjoy their settlement and live quietly. Instead, you've created this foundation with a rather pointed mission." I considered my response carefully. The foundation isn't about my divorce. It's about addressing a fundamental imbalance I've observed throughout my life. Women are taught to nurture relationships, often at the expense of nurturing their financial security. And you're teaching them to prioritize differently? "I'm teaching them that it shouldn't be a choice," I clarified. "That loving your family and protecting your financial autonomy aren't mutually exclusive." The conversation continued for over an hour, covering the Foundation's programs, my perspective on financial education, and the subtle ways women are discouraged from engaging with money matters. I was careful to avoid direct criticism of Gregory or specific details about our divorce, focusing instead on the broader systemic issues. "One last question," Diane said as she gathered her notes. "What would you say to women who feel it's too late to take control of their finances? Women who've spent decades in the passenger seat, so to speak." I smiled. "I would tell them that I was 68 when I finally took full control of my financial life, that it's never too late to learn, to grow, to claim your independence. The view from the driver's seat is worth the effort." The article appeared the following Sunday, accompanied by a photograph of me in my newly redesigned home office, a space previously dominated by Gregory's dark leather and mahogany that I'd transformed with light colors, modern art, and bookshelves, filled with financial texts and literature. The headline read, "The Freedom of Financial Literacy, How Eleanor Mitchell is Empowering Women After Decades of Silence." The piece was thoughtful and nuanced, focusing more on the Foundation's mission than on the sensational aspects of my divorce. Still, the implication was clear to anyone who knew our history. Eleanor Mitchell had emerged from her marriage not as a victim, but as a force for change. I was reviewing the article over Sunday coffee when my phone rang, Gregory's name appearing on the screen. We had maintained minimal contact since the October board meeting, communicating primarily through attorneys when necessary. His call was unexpected. "Eleanor," he said when I answered, his voice strained. "I've just read the Globe article." "Good. Morning, Gregory," I replied evenly. "Did you find it informative?" "I found it pointed," he countered, particularly the references to women being silenced and relegated to the passenger seat in financial decisions. "Those are factual observations about societal patterns," I noted. "Not specific accusations." He sighed heavily. "The board members are calling me. Clients are asking questions. Your little foundation is creating complications for the firm." "The foundation is educational, Gregory. If education threatens the firm, perhaps that reveals more about Mitchell Financial than about my initiatives." A long pause followed. "You've changed," he said finally. "No," I corrected him gently. "I've simply stopped pretending." After we hung up, I sat gazing out at the bay, considering how differently we viewed the same situation. Where Gregory saw threat, I saw opportunity. Where he perceived criticism, I offered education. Our fundamental disconnection had never been clearer. Later that afternoon, Jennifer and Emma arrived for their promised visit. As they settled into the guest room, now redecorated in warm terracottas and blues inspired by my Mediterranean travels, I was struck by how much my relationship with my daughter had evolved since the divorce. "Mom, the house feels completely different," Jennifer observed as we prepared dinner together. "It's like, I don't know, like it can breathe now." "That's exactly how I feel," I admitted, slicing vegetables with newfound skill acquired during cooking classes in Greece. Emma, arranging cheese on a platter, looked up with a smile. "Jen showed me the Globe article. Your foundation sounds amazing. I have some colleagues at the university who might be interested in partnering on research about financial literacy." The ease of our conversation, the natural flow of ideas and support, contrasted sharply with the stilted family dinners of the past, occasions where Gregory had dominated discussion and we had all played our assigned roles. As we carried our meal to the table, a casual spread of Mediterranean-inspired dishes rather than the formal dining experience Gregory had always insisted upon, Jennifer paused, wine bottle in hand. "Mom," she said quietly, "I need to ask you something I've been wondering about since the divorce." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "Were you planning your exit all along, even when we were growing up?" The question hung in the air between us, heavy with implications about my motherhood, about the authenticity of our family life. "No," I said honestly. "I wasn't planning to leave. I was planning to survive." Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.